When Jesus shows you that he is God in the Bible, when for just a moment he bursts through his humanity to reveal what is there, to reveal his divinity by walking on water, a liquid surface, or by multiplying fish and loaves of bread to feed thousands of people. When he does something like that, when he shows you who he is, he does it for a reason. What I mean is, it's never random. There's something he wants you to know. There's something he wants to show you when he does that. Example, Jesus once healed a paralyzed man, something miraculous, something that shows us who he is, and then explained exactly why he did it. There was a specific reason. Jesus wanted everyone who saw this miracle to know that, quoting here, the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. Okay, so that's the principle. When Jesus shows you that he is God, he does it for a reason. So, what is his reason today? You have come here today to church. And here in this service is where Jesus comes to you to serve you with his good gifts, to show you who he is. So, at this specific moment in your life, with whatever specifically is bringing you joy, with whatever specifically is not, why is Jesus coming to you in this moment? To show you who he is. He always has a reason. If you want to know what it is, listen again closely to today's gospel lesson. Just the first two verses to start. Verses 28 and 29. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, James, and John with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. So we call this event the Transfiguration. Jesus is transfigured. He's changed. You just heard Luke describe it, right? But the other Gospels describe it too. The Gospel of Matthew says that Jesus' face was shining like the sun. Gospel of Mark says that Jesus' clothes were whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And what is Jesus showing his disciples? It's not that hard to figure out. It's that their rabbi isn't just another rabbi. He is God's own Son. And remember, when Jesus does that, when he shows people who he is, he does it for a reason. So what's the reason here? Why is he showing his disciples who he is? It's probably to prepare them for the future. Okay? Think of what's coming. Not long after this event on this mountain, what will happen? Jesus will be arrested, condemned, mocked, beaten, bloodied, and executed. In other words, he will look like anything but the glorified Son of God. So maybe this moment, this transfiguration, is Jesus' gift to his disciples to prepare them for what's coming. Through whatever happens next, through whatever fears they have about what will happen to themselves, through whatever doubts they have about Jesus, they can carry this moment with them. The moment when it was true beyond a shadow of a doubt, because there were no shadows to be seen, that this Jesus, he's the Son of God. But that's not the only reason that Jesus shows them who he is on this mountain. More happens. Let's keep reading. Verses 30 to 33. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses and one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. So the Gospel of Mark, it adds a detail that the disciples were frightened by what was happening here. Makes sense. You can put yourself in their shoes a little bit. So they are sleeping, or almost sleeping. Then all at once, bright lights and conversation. If someone's ever flipped the lights on you when you've been, asleep, it's kind of unsettling. So that's what's happening here. But more than that, there's a conversation taking place. Very interesting conversation. Jesus is speaking with Moses and Elijah. What does that do for us? How should we think about that? Think about it like this. That's like you having a conversation with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Okay? Imagine they're not long dead. People see you speaking with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. What are they going to think? There must be something pretty special about you if these two people are giving you their time. Right? And as the disciples see Jesus speaking with Moses and Elijah, something very similar is happening. All of a sudden, there's a whole other reason to know that their Lord, their Master, is so much more than just a rabbi. He is a special servant, like Moses and Elijah, only even greater, because there are 3 men on that mountain, and only one of them is shining like the sun. Verses 34 to 36. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at that time what they had seen. They kept it to themselves. Why keep this a secret? Well, again, the other Gospels give us a full picture here. The Gospels of Matthew and Mark tell us that Jesus told them to keep it a secret. Not forever, only until after he had been raised from the dead. And the reason is probably that the disciples wouldn't fully understand what they had actually seen here until after Jesus had been raised from the dead. Okay, but here once more, Jesus is showing his disciples who he is through a voice. The voice of God the Father makes it incredibly clear. Who is this? This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. And once more, we ask why. Jesus is showing those disciples who he is. What's his reason? The answer this time isn't about what's happening in the future. The answer this time is probably about what happened in the past. Because I read something earlier, and maybe you thought, hey, what's that talking about? The beginning of our gospel is this. About 8 days after Jesus said this, said what? It's like we're picking up in the middle of a story here. Well, we are. About 8 days after Jesus said this, about 8 days before the Transfiguration, what happened on this mountain, Jesus had a conversation, a difficult conversation with his disciples about his identity. He asked, "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "The Christ of God," which is the right answer. But when Jesus told them that the Christ of God must suffer and die, Peter, quote, took him aside and began to rebuke him. Kind of a famous part of Peter's life, right? Yet Peter chastised Jesus, the Son of God. He scolded Jesus. He lectured Jesus. Maybe that's the reason. The reason why Jesus shows him and the other disciples who he is on this mountain, this time using the voice of his Father in heaven. Think again of what the Father said. "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Peter, listen to him. When he says that he's the Christ, listen to him. When he says that he must suffer and die, listen to him. When he says that he will rise again from the dead, listen to him. Okay, that's enough, I think, that's enough time on Peter, James, and John. Let's talk about you now. So we've seen, I hope, why Jesus showed his disciples who he is on this mountain. I hope you noticed it had to do with a specific moment in their lives. It had to do with what happened shortly before in the past. And it had to do with what would happen shortly after in the future. Jesus came to them and showed them who he is at a specific moment in their lives for a specific reason. So now I'm asking this. Why at this specific moment in your life has Jesus come to you and once more shown you who he is? What's the reason? What do you need to know? And I'll start here. What if it's because you need to know what Peter needed to know? This is my son. Listen to him. There's a lot of different directions you could go with that, and I'll bet if you process it honestly, your mind's already going in a direction with it. But here's what I think of. I think of something else that Jesus said shortly before he was transfigured. Something that he may have wanted his disciples to think about as this happened. This is my son, listen to him. Shortly before this, Jesus told his disciples, and today he tells you, take up your cross and follow me. Follow his dirty, bloody footprints to the cross. Experience what he experienced. What did he experience? Men rejected him because he would do only the will of his Father. Now take up your cross and follow me, he says. The world hated him because he would not talk like they talked and say what they would say and think what they would think or drink like they drink. Now take up your cross and follow me, he says. His own family, his own brothers, called him insane, said there was something wrong with him mentally because he would only say what is true, and he would always stand against what is wrong. Now take up your cross and follow me, he says. Are you listening? This is my son. Listen to him. Are you listening? Maybe that's the reason why Jesus has showed you who he is today, because you need a reminder, and I need a reminder. This is my son. Listen to him. Take up your cross. Follow him. Or maybe another reason he showed you who he is today is because now you need to hear about what Jesus was talking with Moses and Elijah about. I didn't mention anything about it when I read it. Did you notice it? Isn't it interesting? It's not just that Jesus was talking with Moses and Elijah, these two monumental figures. We know what they were talking about. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. The departure that he will fulfill in Jerusalem. Interesting. And I think you already know what that's talking about, but this is interesting for another reason, one that's not apparent on the surface. The departure in Greek is the Exodus. That's the word used there. Read straight from the Greek, it's Exodus. This is the Exodus that Jesus will bring about, that he will fulfill in Jerusalem. Interesting also, who is he talking about this with? Moses. Moses knew all about an Exodus. He led the Exodus out of Egypt. The plagues struck Egypt, and the waters of the Red Sea parted, and Moses led the Israelites to freedom, to the promised land, right? That was the first Exodus. That was the lesser Exodus. Because Jesus led an Exodus too. Plagues were involved. In Jerusalem, the plague of God's wrath struck Jesus to free slaves. Not slaves to Pharaoh, but slaves like you and me. Slaves to sin. Slaves to death. Jesus led the Exodus in Jerusalem to free us from those things. Oh, and he parted waters too. Not of the Red Sea, but Jesus parted the water of guilt, the ocean of guilt that separates you from your God. He parted those waters that separate you from the promised land of eternity. Finally, there's no maybe about this one. That is what Jesus is showing you today. That you are forgiven. That's why he is showing you that he is the Son of God who must suffer and die, so that you know and are utterly confident that you are forgiven. You who are reluctant to take up the cross, you are forgiven. You who cannot always give your entire heart, your entire devotion to your God, you are forgiven. You who cannot always seek the good of God's kingdom because you want to seek your own kingdom, you are forgiven. You who suffer now, you who have seen the Son of God in his glory, but whose life feels very inglorious. Not only are you forgiven, you, like Moses and Elijah, standing with Jesus, will one day bask in the glory of the Son of God. Finally, that is what Jesus is showing you today, but someone else on that mountain can put it better than I can. This is what John wrote. Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's what Jesus is showing us in the Transfiguration. And now what Jesus said before, what at first sounds like this terrifying weight, this burden, that too changes. Or it transfigures. The Father says, "This is my Son, listen to him." And we say, "Amen." Jesus says, "Now take up your cross and follow me." And we say, "Amen."